Welcome one, welcome all to Save Me Jebus, episode 8.
Oh, save me, Jebus!
And if you're new to the channel and you're wondering what Save Me Jebus is, it is a weekly Simpsons review podcast in which I review every single episode of The Simpsons until I'm calling out for the man himself, the almighty Jebus. And today we're talking about Telltale Head. And I really remember this episode a lot from when I was a kid. As soon as I read the description last week, I immediately knew just based off of the name itself. There's something about this episode in the way that we see Homer and Bart walking as the climax of the episode is happening, flashing back to see how we got to this point. It's not anything new in storytelling, but it really resonated with me as a kid. And even now, this is still a very good episode. And I'm beginning to notice this trend with The Simpsons in which you don't really know what you're going to get with these episodes. It could be either really chaotic, fun, zany, over-the-top, slapstick humor, and then at times you just get this heartfelt, gut-wrenching story with like episode 1 or the episode with Lisa. There's something about the coming of age stories that maybe I was a little too harsh on the episode with Lisa. You know, it's just the kids, the Simpsons kids dealing with life and learning who they are, essentially. And you know, this episode does the same thing as well, but instead of focusing on Lisa, we're getting a story with Bart in which he's dealing with coming to terms with the importance of being popular and being cool and the risks that we take to look good in front of other people and how that can backfire. But without further ado, let's get into the episode. So here we go. So episode 8's couch gag is, I believe, the same one from episode 2 of The Simpsons, where we got the first couch gag, in which the family all rushes to the couch. Bart pops up and lands and falls back down on the second screen when we are looking at the TV with the credits for Matt Groening and so. I mean, we've seen it already. It's a repeat. It's reused animation at this point. So I don't know what to say about it. But okay, I liked it when I first saw it. I guess it was nice to see it again, but it's the same gag that I'm kind of sick of at this point. So whatever. But as I mentioned in the preface of this episode, the episode begins with Homer and Bart walking with the head of the statue. And Homer's telling Bart, you know, son, when I pulled a few boners back in my day, and immediately boners just stick out of my head. Like, why would you phrase it that way? I've never heard anybody actually say that type of phrasing before. I don't know. So it just felt like very interesting word choice. But there's no context to what's going on. We just see Homer and Bart walking. We don't really even know what he's holding on in his hands until we see the mob and they chase him down to the front of the statue. The two find themselves cornered by the mob, and Bart pleads to tell his story. And it's very interesting because you see Krusty, you see other citizens of Springfield, and but amongst them it's Grandpa Simpson, Selma, and Patty. And I just find it so interesting that they're there in the forefront of the mob. They don't necessarily need to put them in there, but it just shows that what Bart really did must have been awful because they got his own family turning against him. I don't know. I thought it was just interesting that they put those characters in the forefront. But yeah, so Bart's asking to tell his story, and Barney goes, "How long is it gonna take?" And Bart goes, 23 minutes and 5 seconds, which I thought was a really nice meta joke. They tell him, okay, well, just get it over with. So Bart starts telling the story. It starts off on a Sunday. The kids are reporting for takeoff to go to church. Everyone's in their Sunday's best, and the girls look fine. And Bart is immediately told to assume the position, and Marge starts patting him down and starts removing all the stuff that he was trying to sneak into Sunday school. Bart manages, though, to sneak a Walkman with him, and immediately he's listening to music as they're taking off. Marge is ready to go, but Homer is caught up at the football game that he has some gambling stakes in. And the family's driving to church, and Bart and Homer are both occupied by their stuff. Bart is listening to the Walkman, and Homer is listening to the game on the car radio. And when they arrive, Marge actually catches Bart with the Walkman and blames Homer for Bart's behavior, which was actually really interesting, just because I don't think I've ever seen Marge actually discipline her kids. I think that they just know that her kids are bad. But yeah, she really put her foot down, and she even put her foot down with Homer. She blames Homer that's the reason that Bart thinks that he can get away with bringing a Walkman in. So I give her props. Good on you, Marge. Good on you. But Homer decides to take Bart's radio or Walkman or whatever into the church with him. And there's this great visual gag where Homer is listening to the football announcer at the same time that the Reverend is giving his sermon. And it's funny because the sermon is about gambling, and there is Homer more preoccupied with his gambling affairs than the church sermon. It's just kind of like well, I don't know how I would describe that. Is it irony? I don't know. Because it's totally intended, right? Is it? I don't know. I gotta go take a lesson on irony or something, because I don't know what to call this. But yeah, like I said, there's this great visual gag where the Reverend is speaking his sermon, but it's synced up to the audio that Homer is listening to, making it just really, really good. And then I think that they even used the same voice actor that they used for Reverend Lovejoy. I think they synced it up and gave him another script to read with the football commentary. But Homer clams up. He's holding his hands as the Reverend is speaking, and I guess something really good happens in the football game, because he goes, "It's good, it's good, it's good," and outbursts in front of everybody in the church, and embarrasses Marge in the process. And then we cut to the kids in Sunday school. And all the kids are asking so-and-so scenarios if such and such would get into church. And basically, the teacher, the Sunday school teacher, is telling them that only humans are going to get into church. So they're asking, like, what about my cat Snowball? Lisa asks, and she goes, no. What about a monkey or something? And you're like, no. And then Bart asks something like really crazy, like, okay, so what if this guy gets like gangrene or something, and they had to cut his foot off or his leg or something, and it explodes or something? And then the guy dies later on, would he meet up with his foot in heaven? And the teacher goes, for the last time, Bart, yes. But eventually she loses it. And just says, I don't know. Is a bit of blind faith too much to ask? Oh man! And then we cut to the end of church, and Lovejoy is he's surprised that he struck a chord with Homer, and Homer has no idea what he's talking about. Marge is super mad and super embarrassed by Homer's outbursts, but Homer's more concerned with monkeys not being able to get into heaven after they asked the kids, well, what did you learn in Sunday school? Well, we learned that monkeys can't get into heaven. And he's like, what? Okay, maybe not like the dumb ones, the ones that are, not the dumb ones, but like, but what about the ones that do like cool tricks and like smoke cigars and work in circus or whatever? Alright, so anyways, as they're driving, Bart sees that they're playing this movie called Space Mutant 4 and at the theater. And there's like this little thing that says Space Mutant 4, the trilogy continues. And he really wants to watch it, but Marge forbids it. So Bart goes straight to Homer for movie money, and Homer goes, I hope that you're not going to watch a certain space movie that a certain mother forbids from watching. Bart goes, perish the thought, father. And Bart makes this move. He has some really cool skate moves. The animation going from the house to the theater is actually really cool. I really like the way that looked. But there Bart meets Kearney and Jimbo, and he's like, yeah, of course I know who you guys. You guys are the worst kids in school. And so the third kid comes out, who I forget his name at this time, and they didn't actually say it in the episode. Hey, the coast is clear, and so they invite Bart to go in with them, and Bart goes like, it's like sneaking into a movie is practically stealing, and one of them goes, it is stealing. But Bart's hanging out with the cool kids, and but they get kicked out of the film, and I think Jimbo goes, well, we'll just take our business elsewhere. I'm like, yeah, okay. And then they go to the Quickie Mart, and we see Apu for the first time. And the joke is that while Bart is ordering squishies for his new friends, Apu tells them that he has eyes on the back of his head. So don't bother trying to steal anything. But as soon as he turns around, bum, 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 bum. And Bart gets the squishies and tells the guys, like, don't worry, guys, I got it this time. And then he turns around and they're all gone. They go to the statue. And they start throwing rocks at the statue, and so they tell Bart, like, are you gonna do it? And he goes, what? No, that's the founder, man. And he starts telling them a little bit of story, and I'm just surprised that Bart is very knowledgeable on his history of the founding of Springfield. And I think that itself is just shows how important Jebediah is to the citizens of Springfield, that when eventually things hit the fan and the entire town goes mad, I think it just shows that, like, if even bratty little Bart knows how important the statue is, and he knows the history of the founder of their town, that of course everyone's going to be mad. But yeah, I just found it a little bit interesting that that Bart knows his history. From there, the kids go cloud gazing, and Bart mentions that a cloud looks a lot like the town founder without the head, and Jimbo says that he wishes that somebody would cut his head off, because it would be cool, and people would get really upset about it, and that would be funny to them. And I don't remember what Bart said, but he says something that the kids just start teasing him, and you're like, oh yeah, well, you love Jebediah, huh? And so they told him, like, get out of here, Simpson, we thought you were cool. So he takes off. Bart beats it. He's not cool anymore. So then he goes and he asks Homer the next day how important it is to be popular, and Homer says that, well, it is the most important thing in the world, as long as you're not talking about killing anyone. And so that gives Bart the A-OK. And then we see Ninja Bart. He starts sneaking out of the house. And I really love this. I really love seeing Bart Ninja, just because I was a huge fan of the Simpsons Hit and Run game and just collecting all of the costumes. I love seeing the costumes from the show make it onto the episode, onto the game, and then going back and watching the show and saying, like, oh, that's where that costume's from. It's really great. So yeah, we see our first Simpsons Hit and Run costume. But yeah, he sneaks out and he cuts the head off of the statue. And as the head hits the floor, Bart quickly realizes the gravity of what he's done, and he says it to himself, "What have I done?" The next morning, Bart wakes up with the statue looking at him. And while Bart is trying to get ready for school and put the head inside of his backpack, we see Homer, who is like really preoccupied with spending some cash on a bowling ball, which is going to cut into next week's episode. So that's pretty cool. And so as Bart is trying to quickly leave the house, they hear the news about the beheading of the statue. The family hears it over the radio, and everybody is just saying that it's not just a statue. Lisa says some stuff, and then Homer goes, "Is the Statue of Liberty just a statue? Is the Leaning Tower of Pisa just a statue?" Homer's so devastated. You actually see him with his hand over his face, and he just needs a minute while everybody is just taking in the news. And from there, we see the whole town hear the news. And Abe Simpson, the grandpa, says that he wants to decapitate the guy who cut the statue's head. Oh man, dude, that's your grandchild. So when Bart is ready to show the guys what he's done, the guys mention that if they met the guy who cut the head off, that they want to break every bone in his body. Because it's one thing to throw rocks, but that's the guy who clawed a bear with his bare hand or something like that. Kearney says, yeah man, that was just cloud talk. And from there, Bart freaks out, he takes off, and the statue starts talking to him. The statue's head says, well, look what you've done, Bart. You wanted to be popular, now you're the most hated person in town. And while that's a great line, it just feels like, well, yeah, why didn't you let us come to that conclusion ourselves? Why did you have to spell it out for us? As he's passing the crowd of people looking at the statue, at the headless statue, we see Mr. Burns standing right next to Mo. And he notices that Bart is really, really troubled. And Mo says, well, you can't blame him. And Mr. Burns starts crying. And I think that it was really funny because, again, I think it's just another visual cue of just how important Jebediah Springfield is to the people of Springfield. That even somebody as rich as Mr. Burns is standing right next to Mo Sislak. Damn. Isn't that a trip? But, so then Bart gets home, and Lisa's watching the Krusty the Krab show, or Krusty the Krab. Krusty the Clown, excuse me, what the hell? But he's watching Krusty, and Krusty is calling out the call to his audience to turn in their parents if they know who did the crime. Oh my god! And then we see Sideshow Bob too, so wow, okay. So Bart actually starts to dig a hole to bury the talking head, and just as he's about to start burying it, the head somehow appeals to Bart's morality. The family is watching a dramatization of Jebediah killing the bear, and it seems a little quick, seems a little insensitive to kind of make that kind of monetary a thing, but I guess. And Bart shows them the head, and they immediately go towards him. Homer says, "I knew it all along," and so they ask him why. And he says, I really wanted some really bad kids to like me. Somehow I got it in my head that being popular was the most important thing in the world. And Marge says, well, that's ridiculous. Who would say that? And then Homer hears this and he quickly backs off. He's like, you know what? Well, he's just a kid after all, Marge. And Marge quickly realizes that Homer had something to do with it. So Homer takes Bart back so they can return the head, and we end up at the start of the episode, and Homer's talking about boners again. Well, yeah, it's the same scene. And as the footage continues, the town tells him, all right, we know this part. And I thought it was a really clever way of telling a joke and reusing a bit of animation. God, it was so good. That was so good. But yeah, so then Bart says, well, that's my story. If you want to tear apart this young Sunday school student as he stands on the brink of salvation, I await your wrath. Very dramatic, Bart. But hey, it worked because the mob starts saying that somehow I don't feel like killing anymore. And they back off. Bart puts the head back and he says, forgive me, sir. And the town stares in awe. Mr. Burns tells Smithers that he loves him, and he responds by saying the feeling is more than mutual. Is Mr. Smithers gay at this point? I do not know, because he is certainly a kiss-ass, but is he gay? And Homer tells Bart, it's like, good going, son, but remember, most lynch mobs aren't this nice. And the episode ends. This was a really good episode. I really appreciate the narrative approach of telling the story, showing Bart and Homer after the incident and then rewinding back. It's not by any means a new storytelling method, and frankly most anime try to pull it off and everyone hates it, but since we know Bart and we know Homer, we understand that these two characters really must have done something crazy to get to this point. It was a good episode showing the morality of Bart. Yeah, he's a brat, but he's not a kid without morals. He knows right from wrong, and even when he's led astray, he understands the weight of his crime. And we know this by the talking head of Jebediah Springfield. All along, that is clearly Bart's imagination. And we know this because as Bart is putting the head back on the statue, he says, "Thank you, sir." And the head responds by saying, "No problem." It's a way of showing us that in Bart's imagination, this was him lifting the weight and the guilt and the stress of his crime just coming off his shoulders. When the mob forgives him and he's there putting the head back on the statue, and the statue responds by saying, "It's no problem," we just know that Bart no longer feels guilty. He's forgiven himself for what he's done. And that's pretty cool. I really remember liking this episode a lot as a kid, just because of the narrative structure. But as an adult, I still really, really love this episode. Just sitting there and analyzing and taking notes for this episode. It was a lot of fun. It wasn't a crazy funny episode, but it was very thoughtful, and it just has this really heartwarming message that it's not important to be popular, and it's better to just do the right thing. But anyways, next week on Save Me Jebus, Life on the Fast Lane, Homer's bowling ball gift for Marge prompts her to take up the sport. Maybe also a handsome instructor who offers to teach her many things. I vaguely remember this one, but hey, it's a Marge episode and I'm pretty excited about it. So we'll see you guys next week. Bye, cha.